This year, as part of Team Cycling Plus, I had the opportunity to ride from one end of Britain to the other. A typical Land's End to John O'Groats ride can last anywhere between 9 and 14 days, so that's a typical touring route. It's a very classic ride, and it starts in Land's End, which is the southernmost point of England, and rides all the way to the most northern mainland point of Scotland. It's a bloody long way. Because this is a challenge, me and 3 mates decided, possibly stupidly, to do the ride in 6 days. Now this averages out about 170 miles a day, route depending. One of the other interesting challenges of this journey was we decided to use a motorhome, and it added another element of the journey that none of us were prepared for. Along with me for the trip were Callum, Jorgen and Daniel. And our support crew were actually Daniel's parents, Don and Gwen, and they looked after us for the week. It's obviously a fairly mileage heavy ride, so the bike had to accommodate comfort as well as being a bit nippy to cover the mileage during the day. Given that the longest days could last up to about 15 hours, so comfort was a really important part of which bike that we got to choose. Cannondale was supporting Team Cycling Plus this year, and we opted for the Carbon Synapse. The Synapse is a bike that the Cannondale Pro team have used on the cobbles of Paris-Roubaix, so there is the comfort there, but there's also a slight race twinge to it. We felt like it was a very suitable bike for long distances, but at speed. There is comfort built into the bike with Cannondale's own 25.4 seat post. It adds a bit of flex, and it definitely takes the edge out of some potholes. You also have the Save Plus micro suspension seat stays. That means that the seat stays are flattened just to give a slight absorbing quality to the ride, and a slightly taller head tube just to help with a more comfortable position. Firstly, the fabric saddle that it came with had to go. I just didn't get on with it at all during the first initial training rides. So I put on my much favoured Specialized power saddle, and I also swapped out the Mavic Axioms for some fairly Gucci MV SES 5.6 discs paired with Vittoria Corsa G Plus tyres. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, NVs for long distance touring? Well, I get it. They're probably pretty overkill, but man, they're a lot of fun to ride. I'd say that the NVs are suited very much for somewhere like Mallorca, where I have ridden them. For the UK, when you do find the rolling and flat road and it kicks into about 40-45 k's an hour, and that's really where they're designed to live, then you can really feel it. And when paired with the Vittoria Corsa G Pluses with a super supple, low rolling resistance that those tyres are known for, then it does help save those much needed watts for the long time on the bike. The NVs are designed specifically for 25, so obviously I went with the 25 Corsa G Pluses. I did have one puncture, and that was on the second day, and that was because of a fairly nasty nail, so no real fault of the tyres. I think any tyre would have punctured because of that. One negative I do have about the tyre is they were effectively trashed by the end of the ride, and I'd put them on fresh at the start. They are essentially a race tyre in clincher format, and about 1,000 miles is a fair bit less than I was expecting, but I feel like it's probably worth the money for the comfort and the speed that you do get. The gearing of the bike is understandably pretty friendly. You get a compact change set with a 50-34 up front and an 11-32 at the back. I actually changed out to an 11-28 just because it was more what I was suited to, and I like the smaller jumps between the gears, and I never really felt that it affected me in any way. The ride took place in early August, and throughout the week we experienced the whole range of British weather. On the first day we had really nice 15-degree, 16-degree weather, and the further north we went, each day got progressively colder by about 1.5–2 degrees. When we hit Wales, we were greeted with rain, and that didn't really stop for the next 3 days. Now, when you range from anywhere between damp and soaking wet, it does tend to grate on the morale a bit, but the fact that you are riding with 3 mates, it helps lift the spirits, and it wasn't too bad, but there's a slight bit of grumpiness every now and then, but there were no fisticuffs, which really pleased to be able to say. Because we had a motorhome, it meant we could ride quite light. We weren't carrying our own clothes and tons of food. And we did meet the motorhome at a couple of points throughout the day just to refuel, which was a nice thing to be able to do. At the end of the day, living in a motorhome was something that we really had to acclimatise to, living in such close proximity, actually getting a routine, because at the start of the ride, none of us had any clue about living in a motorhome and the practicalities of it. So you lock your bike away, you get changed, you make sure just things are tidy, for one, that's a huge part of it. And really it surprised me at the time that it took to do all those things. And the first night we didn't get to bed until about 2:45 in the morning, and we had to be up at I think 6:30. So it definitely took us a while to get into a rhythm, but towards the end of the ride I can safely say that we did, and that was a nice thing. People have ridden further, faster and for longer, but when you average about 170 miles a day for 6 days, it really does take its toll. Now, at the start of the ride there were 4 riders, but at the end of the ride there were just 2. Callum pulled out quite early on, about halfway through the week, because of a recurring knee injury, and it just wasn't possible for him to ride. Jørgen, the Norwegian giant, had to pull out at the end of day 5 because of an Achilles heel injury. The final climb on day 5 out of Fort Augustus was this really horrible climb that just went on forever and ever and ever. And it was in total darkness as well, which really wasn't too fun. So on the final day, this left 2 riders to cover about 163 miles. Throughout the final day, I could sense that Daniel was getting progressively worse and worse. We managed to power through most of the day, up to a point where we only had 50 miles to go. But on the run into that final stop, and I mean, hopefully he'll be okay with me saying this, but he did have a bit of a meltdown. Now it's kind of a weird thing to see, someone that you've spent so much time with just facing the floor, with his mum kneeling over him with a couple of really big blankets. But I mean, to be fair to him, in all respect, he sort of picked himself up, had a real good bite to eat, and managed to finish those last 50 miles. It was fairly slow, but I'm really happy we could finish the ride together. So for me, the whole trip was a resounding success. It was about 8 months of planning. I'd ridden a lot in preparation for it, but it wasn't entirely without problems. Even now, 3 months later, this side of my hand is still a bit numb. It's something called ulnar neuropathy, and I think that's down to the fact that I didn't wear gloves throughout the whole week, which was fairly stupid. So my recommendation is, for longer touring rides, definitely wear gloves. In summary, in 6 days I rode 1,018 miles. I climbed 50,048 feet, spent 60 hours, 26 minutes and 17 seconds riding my bike. We averaged 16.9 miles an hour, and take this one with a large pinch of salt, burnt 37,575 calories, all according to Strava. Looking back at the week, I can safely say I've learnt a hell of a lot about long distance riding, what we did right and what we did wrong. Now, would I do this again? Probably. Probably the distance though, but not in 6 days. That was just a bit too much for me, and just the whole lack of sleep, it really got to me towards the end. When we finally got to John O'Groats, I think my brain realised we'd finished and just everything shut down and I could barely talk. But the whole experience was incredible, and I've got some brilliant memories out of it. So I would highly recommend the Land's End to John O'Groats ride in whatever time frame suits you best, just because it is such a classic ride and you go through some incredible places.